I'm Emily, 22, a college student who works since high school to fund my engineering dreams. Growing up, I watched my parents shower my younger sister Natalie with endless praise, while my achievements gathered dust. They promised to match my savings with a college fund they'd started at my birth. When acceptance letters arrived, they dropped a bombshell they'd spent my money on Natalie's art career and wanted me to take out loans for her too. I never imagined I'd end up suing my own parents. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from, and subscribe to hear how I uncovered their betrayal and finally stood up for myself. The earliest memory I have of noticing the difference between how my parents treated me versus my sister Natalie was at my 8th grade science fair. I had spent weeks perfecting a project about renewable energy, creating a working solar-powered water filtration system. The judges awarded me first place, and I rushed home clutching my blue ribbon, eager to show my parents. When I burst through the door of our suburban Seattle home, Mom and Dad barely glanced up. My father, James, an accountant with a perpetually furrowed brow, muttered, "That's nice, Emily," before returning to his newspaper. My mother, Diana, who sold real estate part-time, offered a distracted smile before turning her attention back to Natalie. My sister, 4 years younger than me, was showing them a watercolor painting she'd made in her art class. It was pretty, a landscape with a rainbow, but fairly typical for a fourth grader. Yet my parents reacted as though she'd produced a masterpiece worthy of hanging in a gallery. "Look at those colors," Dad exclaimed, setting aside his newspaper. "You've got such a natural talent, Natalie." Mom took photos from multiple angles, already planning where to hang it in our living room. "You're going to be a famous artist someday," she gushed, hugging Natalie tightly. My blue ribbon ended up in a drawer while Natalie's painting was framed and displayed prominently on our living room wall. That night I cried silently in my bedroom, wondering why my achievements never seemed good enough. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. I excelled academically, particularly in math and science, maintaining a 4.0 GPA and joining robotics club. I'd come home with perfect test scores and academic awards only to receive cursory acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Natalie's every artistic endeavor from pottery to digital design was celebrated, with enthusiasm bordering on reverence. By the time I reached high school, I'd grown accustomed to this dynamic. I poured my energy into planning for college, determined to become an engineer. I knew I needed to save money, so I got my first job at 16, working weekends at a local bookstore. When I mentioned college costs to my parents, they assured me they had a plan. "We started a college fund when you were born," Dad explained one night at dinner. "Keep saving what you can and we'll match whatever you put aside. Between that and your scholarship chances, we'll make it work." I felt relieved knowing they supported my educational goals, even if they didn't show the same enthusiasm they did for Natalie's artistic pursuits. With this assurance, I added a second job during summer breaks, working at a coffee shop in the mornings, before heading to the bookstore for afternoon shifts. Every dollar I earned went straight into my savings account. During my junior year, Natalie began taking private art lessons with a renowned local artist. These sessions weren't cheap. I overheard my parents discussing the $300 hourly rate. They also purchased high-end supplies for her, imported brushes, premium canvases, and professional-grade paints that cost more than what I earned in a week. "Natalie needs the right tools to develop her talent," Mom would say whenever I expressed surprise at another expensive purchase. "Art requires investment." Meanwhile, when my graphing calculator broke before a crucial exam, I had to use my own savings to replace it. When I asked if the college fund might cover educational expenses before college, my father shook his head. "That's for tuition, Emily. Day-to-day school supplies come from the regular budget, and we've allocated those funds elsewhere this month." I accepted this explanation, still believing that my hard work combined with their promised matching funds would secure my educational future. Throughout senior year, I occasionally asked about the specifics of my college fund. How much had accumulated, what type of account it was in, whether I needed to fill out specific paperwork to access it, but my parents always deflected these questions. "Don't worry about the details," Dad would say. "I'm an accountant. Remember, I've got it all under control." "Just focus on finishing strong and getting into a good program," Mom would add. "The money stuff is our department." By graduation, I had saved nearly $20,000 from my part-time job's money. I was proud to contribute toward my education, expecting it would be matched by my parents' fund. I had also secured a partial scholarship, though not enough to cover full tuition at my dream schools. When acceptance letters arrived in spring, I was thrilled to receive an offer from a prestigious engineering program with an excellent reputation in my desired field of environmental engineering. It wasn't the most expensive school on my list, but the annual costs would still exceed what my scholarship and personal savings could cover without the additional funds my parents had promised. The day I received my acceptance, I noticed an odd exchange of glances between my parents when I shared the news. Instead of the congratulations I expected, there was a moment of tension before they offered strained smiles. "That's great, honey," Mom said, her voice lacking the enthusiasm she always showed for Natalie's accomplishments. "We should talk about finances soon," Dad added quickly, changing the subject. That brief interaction was the first clear indication that something wasn't right with my college plans, though at the time, I couldn't have imagined just how dramatically my life was about to change. The truth came crashing down during a family dinner the week after my high school graduation. I had just finished researching student housing options and was eager to discuss my plans with my parents. The summer stretched ahead, my final months at home. Before beginning this exciting new chapter of my life, Mom prepared my favorite meal, lasagna with garlic bread, which should have been my first clue that something was off. In our house, special meals were typically reserved for Natalie's achievements or to soften bad news. Still, I was too preoccupied with thoughts of university to notice the warning signs. As we ate, I chatted enthusiastically about the engineering program and the advanced research facilities at my chosen school. My parents exchanged those same uncomfortable glances they'd been sharing with increasing frequency whenever college came up. "Before you get too deep into planning," Dad interrupted, setting down his fork with a finality that silenced me mid-sentence, "we need to discuss some alternative options for your education." My stomach tightened. "Alternative options? What do you mean?" Mom reached across the table to touch my hand, a gesture that felt patronizing rather than comforting. "Honey, your father and I have been looking at the numbers and we think it would be more practical for you to start at community college." "Community college?" I echoed, confusion washing over me. "But we've been planning for a 4-year university since I was little. You always said the college fund—" "About that fund," Dad cut in his voice, taking on the professional tone he used when discussing difficult financial matters with clients. "We've had to make some adjustments to our investment strategy over the years." He pulled out a folder containing brochures for the local community college and various student loan applications. With clinical detachment, he began explaining how I could complete 2 years of general education courses locally before transferring to a university, potentially saving thousands in tuition costs. The entire time my mind was screaming, what happened to my college fund? Where was the money they'd promised would be waiting for me? But before I could voice these questions, my mother delivered the true bombshell. "Emily, something wonderful has happened for Natalie," she said, her face lighting up with the familiar glow she reserved for my sister. Her art portfolio was reviewed by the admissions committee at Westridge Academy of Fine Arts, and they're extremely impressed with her potential. Westridge was an exclusive private arts high school and college preparatory program, known for its celebrity alumni and eye-watering tuition costs. Acceptance was indeed prestigious, but what did this have to do with my college plans? "That's great for Natalie," I said cautiously. "But what about my university?" My parents exchanged another look, one I now recognize as guilt mixed with determination. "The truth is," Dad continued, "we've invested your college fund in Natalie's artistic development over the years. The private lessons, the materials, the portfolio development, it all required significant resources. And now, with this opportunity at Westridge—" His voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. My college fund, the money I had been counting on the funds that had been explicitly promised to match my own savings, had been diverted to support my sister's artistic pursuits. I felt as though someone had punched me in the stomach. "You spent my college money on Natalie's art lessons. We invested in the future with the highest potential return." Dad corrected, his tone suddenly defensive. "Natalie has extraordinary talent. Her instructors say she could be nationally recognized within a few years." "But what about my future?" My voice cracked as the betrayal sank in. "What about all the promises you made to me?" "Engineers are always in demand," Mom said dismissively. You can take out loans like most students do. Your path is more conventional. Natalie's window of opportunity is now. The arts world values youth and fresh perspective. I sat in stunned silence as they continued explaining their rationale, each word driving the knife deeper. According to them, my practical nature and academic abilities meant I would be fine, regardless of which school I attended. Meanwhile, Natalie's once-in-a-generation talent required immediate and substantial financial support. Then came the request that pushed me beyond shock into disbelief. Actually, Dad said, sliding another form across the table, we were hoping you might help with Natalie's tuition at Westridge. I stared at the paper, a private education loan application with my name on it. You want me to take out loans for Natalie's high school? I asked incredulously. You have excellent credit from those credit cards we helped you manage, Dad explained, conveniently omitting that I'd never actually applied for any credit cards to my knowledge. The interest rates you'd qualify for would be much better than what we could get. And since you'll be earning an engineering salary in a few years, repayment would be much easier for you than for us or for Natalie, Mom added, as though this justified their outrageous request. I sat frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what they were asking. Not only had they diverted funds explicitly saved for my education, but they now expected me to go into debt for my sister's benefit, all while drastically scaling back my own educational opportunities. I need to think about this, I managed to say, pushing away from the table. Neither of my parents seemed to notice my distress. They were already discussing the wonderful opportunities awaiting Natalie at Westridge. In my bedroom that night, I finally broke down. Years of unequal treatment culminating in this ultimate betrayal came crashing down on me. I sobbed into my pillow, trying to muffle the sound so Natalie wouldn't hear. Despite everything, I didn't blame my sister. She had been raised to believe she was special, deserving of every advantage. The fault lay with my parents and their blatant favoritism. For years, I had accepted being second best in my parents' eyes. I had worked hard, saved diligently, and trusted their promises. Now I discovered it had all been a lie. The college fund had been drained for Natalie's benefit, and they expected me to sacrifice even more. As I cried myself to sleep that night, I had no idea that this painful revelation would ultimately lead to uncovering an even greater betrayal, one that would force me to make the hardest decision of my life. The morning after learning about my parents' betrayal, I woke up feeling hollow. My entire future, so carefully planned now, seemed to be crumbling around me. I needed advice from someone I could trust, someone who wasn't entangled in my parents' web of favoritism. I thought immediately of my Aunt Jennifer, my mother's younger sister. Aunt Jennifer had always been different from my mother. She noticed my achievements, sent me thoughtful gifts related to my interests, and treated both Natalie and me with equal attention when she visited. Mom often complained that Jennifer was too independent and didn't understand family priorities, which I now recognized as code for doesn't agree with our treatment of Emily. I texted Jennifer asking if we could talk privately, and she immediately suggested meeting for coffee at a small cafe across town away from my parents' watchful eyes. When I arrived, her warm hug broke through the numbness I'd been feeling since the previous night. "What's going on, Emily?" she asked once we were seated with our drinks. "You look like you haven't slept." I took a deep breath and explained everything, the years of favoritism, the promises about the college fund, and finally the shocking revelation that the money had been spent on Natalie, followed by their expectation that I would take out loans in my name for her. As I spoke, Aunt Jennifer's expression shifted from concern to outrage. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her hands gripping her coffee cup so tightly I feared it might shatter. "Emily," she finally said, her voice carefully controlled, "there's something you need to know about your college fund. It wasn't just your parents' money to spend however they wanted." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Your grandparents, my parents, set up an educational trust for you when you were born. They did the same for Natalie when she came along. They were very specific that this money was exclusively for each granddaughter's college education. It wasn't a general family fund your parents could redirect. I felt the blood drain from my face. Are you saying they spent money that wasn't even theirs to spend? Jennifer nodded grimly. When Mom and Dad set up those trusts, they named your parents as trustees until you turned 21, at which point control was supposed to transfer to you. The money was always legally yours, designated specifically for your education. But that means I couldn't even finish the thought. It means what they've done isn't just unfair, it could be illegal, Jennifer confirmed. They've potentially breached their fiduciary duty as trustees of your educational trust. My mind raced with implications. How much was in the trust? Do you know? The initial amount was $50,000, but with proper investment over 21 years, it should be considerably more now. Your grandparents weren't wealthy, but education was their highest priority. They wanted to ensure both their granddaughters could attend college without financial burden. $50,000 plus growth over 2 decades. The amount was staggering compared to my carefully saved $20,000, and my parents had spent it all on Natalie's art supplies and lessons. The betrayal cut even deeper now. What can I do? I asked, my voice small. Aunt Jennifer's expression was determined. First, we need to see exactly what's happened to that trust. I can help you request the financial records. As a beneficiary, you have the right to that information even though you're not yet the trustee. Over the next week, with Jennifer's guidance, I began investigating. We requested bank statements, trust documents, and transaction histories. My parents were surprisingly evasive when I asked for this information directly, claiming the paperwork was complicated and that I wouldn't understand the investment strategies. Their reluctance only strengthened my resolve. Jennifer connected me with a banker friend who explained how to formally request trust documents as a beneficiary. When the records finally arrived, what they revealed was even worse than I'd imagined. My educational trust, which should have contained over $100,000 after years of investment growth, had been systematically drained. Regular withdrawals dating back to when I was 12 coincided perfectly with the timeline of Natalie's artistic development. Her first private lessons, international art camps, premium supplies, and portfolio consultations. But the financial exploitation didn't end there. Among the documents was information about credit accounts opened in my name shortly after my 18th birthday accounts I had never applied for or even known existed. These cards had been used for family vacations, dining out, and numerous purchases at high-end art supply stores. They committed identity theft, Jennifer said, her voice shaking with anger as we reviewed the documents together in her apartment. They opened credit in your name without your knowledge or consent. I felt sick as the full picture emerged. For years, I'd worked multiple jobs, carefully saving every dollar, believing my parents were doing the same for my education. Meanwhile, they had not only spent my trust fund on Natalie, but had also fraudulently opened credit accounts in my name, potentially damaging my financial future. I don't understand how they could do this, I whispered, staring at the evidence spread across Jennifer's kitchen table. What kind of parents steal from their own child? Jennifer put her arm around my shoulders. The kind who have convinced themselves they're doing what's best for the family, even when they're really just favoring one child at the expense of another. The emotional toll of these discoveries was immense. Each new piece of evidence felt like another betrayal, another confirmation that my parents viewed me as less deserving than my sister. I cycled through grief, rage, and a deep sense of worthlessness. Had I ever truly been loved by my parents? Or had I merely been useful, a responsible child who required little attention and could eventually be exploited for Natalie's benefit? Jennifer, seeing my spiraling distress, connected me with a therapist friend who agreed to see me on a sliding scale fee. She also introduced me to Marcus, a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud cases. Given the evidence we've gathered, Marcus explained during our consultation, your parents have potentially committed several serious offenses: breach of fiduciary duty as trustees, misappropriation of trust funds, and identity theft by opening credit accounts without your knowledge or consent. What are my options? I asked, still struggling to accept that I was discussing potential legal action against my own parents. You could file a civil lawsuit seeking restitution of the misappropriated funds, he explained. There's also the option of reporting the identity theft and credit fraud to the authorities, which could potentially lead to criminal charges. The thought of criminal charges against my parents made my stomach turn despite everything they'd done. I don't want them to go to jail, I said quietly. I just want my educational money back, and I want them to understand what they've done. Marcus nodded understandingly. Many victims of familial financial abuse feel the same way. We can start with a demand letter clearly outlining the evidence we've gathered and requesting full restitution of the trust funds. Sometimes the reality check of formal legal communication is enough to prompt cooperation. I agreed to this approach, hoping against hope that my parents would recognize the seriousness of their actions and make amends without a protracted legal battle. While waiting for the demand letter to be prepared, I continued uncovering the extent of my parents' financial misconduct. With Jennifer's help, I contacted the credit bureaus to obtain my full credit report, which revealed additional accounts I'd never authorized. I froze my credit to prevent further fraud and began the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. Each new discovery strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up against years of unfair treatment and outright exploitation. For the first time in my life, I was fighting for myself rather than accepting whatever scraps of attention and support my parents deigned to give me. The night before we planned to confront my parents with the evidence and legal demand, Jennifer held my hands across her kitchen table. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked gently. "Once we take this step, your relationship with your parents may never be the same." I thought about years of diminished achievements, diverted resources, and outright theft. I thought about the future I had worked so hard for now in jeopardy, because the people who should have protected me had instead exploited me. "I'm ready," I said with more certainty than I'd ever felt. "The relationship already isn't what I thought it was. At least now we'll be dealing with the truth." The confrontation with my parents took place in our living room on a Sunday afternoon. I had asked them to be home, saying I wanted to discuss college financial options further. They likely assumed I had resigned myself to their plan of community college and loans for Natalie. They couldn't have been more wrong. I arrived with Aunt Jennifer and a folder containing copies of all the evidence we'd gathered. Trust documents, bank statements, showing systematic withdrawals, credit card applications, and statements from accounts opened in my name without my knowledge. We also brought the formal demand letter prepared by Marcus, my lawyer. When we walked in together, my parents' expressions immediately shifted from casual welcome to wary suspicion at the sight of Jennifer. "What's this about?" Dad asked, his accountant's instinct for trouble clearly triggered. "We need to talk about my educational trust fund," I said, working to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety churning in my stomach. "The one Grandma and Grandpa set up for me." A flash of alarm crossed my father's face before he composed himself. "That's family business, Emily. I'm not sure why you've involved your aunt." "Because I needed someone on my side," I replied, my voice stronger now. "Someone who wouldn't lie to me about money that legally belongs to me." Mom stepped forward, her expression shifting to the placating smile she used when trying to smooth over uncomfortable situations. "Honey, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Your father and I have always had your best interests at heart with our financial decisions." "Then you can explain these?" I said, opening the folder and placing documents on the coffee table. Bank records showing over $75,000 withdrawn from my educational trust over the past 9 years. Credit card statements from accounts opened in my name that I never authorized. Receipts for Natalie's art supplies lessons and summer programs paid for with my trust fund money. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, a cold, defensive anger that transformed him from the dad I knew into a stranger. "You've been spying on our financial records," he demanded, ignoring the evidence on the table. "I've been investigating the theft of my own money," I corrected him. "Money that Grandma and Grandpa left specifically for my education. Money you were legally obligated to preserve for that purpose as trustees. We made investment decisions for the benefit of the family." Dad insisted, falling back on the justification they'd used at our previous conversation. Natalie's artistic development. was not what my trust fund was for. I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. The trust documents clearly state the money was designated exclusively for my higher education. You had no legal right to spend it on Natalie or anything else. We're your parents, Mom interjected, tears beginning to form in her eyes. We make decisions about what's best for this family. You don't understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that you stole from me, I said, my own eyes filling with tears, despite my determination to remain composed. You took money that was legally mine, money meant for my future, and spent it on Natalie. Then you had the audacity to ask me to take out fraudulent loans to further fund her education. That's a harsh characterization. Dad objected, though his confidence seemed to be wavering as he glanced at the documented evidence. We redirected family resources to where they would have the greatest impact. It's not a characterization at all, Aunt Jennifer spoke up, her voice tight with controlled anger. It's a factual description of what you did. You breached your fiduciary duty as trustees of Emily's educational fund. You committed identity theft by opening credit accounts in her name without her knowledge or consent. These aren't family disagreements about resource allocation. They're potentially criminal offenses. The word criminal landed like a bomb in the room. My parents stared at Jennifer with a mixture of shock and growing fear. Criminal, Mom whispered. You can't be serious. Completely serious, I confirmed, sliding the lawyer's letter across the table. This outlines the legal violations and demands full restitution of all funds misappropriated from my trust, plus damages for the identity theft and credit fraud. Dad reached for the letter with a trembling hand, scanning its contents with growing alarm. You're threatening legal action against your own parents after everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, years of suppressed hurt finally finding voice. You've consistently favored Natalie, minimized my achievements, and now I discover you've been stealing from me for years. So yes, I'm prepared to take legal action if that's what it takes to recover what's rightfully mine. This will devastate Natalie's future, Mom said, attempting another angle. Is that what you want? To ruin your sister's chances? Don't you dare put that on me, I said, anger flaring. I've never tried to limit Natalie's opportunities. I've supported her dreams just as much as you have. The difference is I haven't stolen from anyone to do it. You could have supported both of us fairly, but you chose not to. As if on cue, the front door opened and Natalie walked in, returning from a friend's house. She stopped short at the tableau before her, our parents looking stricken, Aunt Jennifer standing protectively beside me, and documents spread across the coffee table. What's going on? She asked, looking between us all with confusion. Mom immediately tried to turn the situation to her advantage. Your sister is threatening to sue us, Natalie. She wants to take away the money that's been supporting your art education. Natalie's eyes widened in confusion and hurt as she looked at me. Emily, what are they talking about? I felt a surge of protectiveness toward my sister, who was as much a victim of our parents' manipulations as I was, just in a different way. That's not what's happening, Nat. Mom and Dad took money from my college fund money our grandparents left specifically for my education and spent it on your art programs without telling either of us. They also opened credit cards in my name without my permission. Is that true? Natalie asked our parents, her voice small. They're twisting things, Dad insisted. We've always made decisions based on what would benefit this family the most in the long run. Your artistic career has incredible potential. So you did take Emily's college money for my stuff, Natalie pressed, looking increasingly distressed. The momentary silence from our parents was confirmation enough. I didn't know, Natalie said, looking at me with genuine remorse. I swear, Emily, I had no idea. I know you didn't, I assured her. This isn't about you. It's about Mom and Dad's choices. We've given you everything, Mom said to me, her voice hardening despite her tears. And this is how you repay us, by turning your sister against us, by threatening us with lawyers and criminal charges. I'm giving you a chance to make this right, I countered, pointing to the demand letter. Full restitution of my trust fund plus damages for the identity theft. If you agree, we can handle this privately without court involvement. And if we don't, Dad asked, his voice dangerously quiet, then my lawyer will file suit next week and we'll let a judge decide. My father stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. I won't be blackmailed by my own daughter. If you do this, if you pursue legal action against your family, you're no longer welcome in this house." The threat hung in the air between us. For a moment, I wavered. Despite everything, these were my parents. This was my home. Was I really prepared to lose both over money? But then I remembered it wasn't just about money. It was about years of unequal treatment, about betrayal and theft from the person they should have protected, about planning to saddle me with debt for my sister's benefit without a second thought. I stood up, gathering the documents back into my folder. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'll be staying with Aunt Jennifer until this is resolved one way or another." I turned to Natalie, whose face was streaked with tears. "This isn't your fault, Nat. I love you, and I hope we can talk soon when things calm down." As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. "If you walk out now, Emily, you're choosing money over family. Is that really what you want?" I paused, turning back to look at them one last time. "No, Mom. I'm choosing self-respect over continued exploitation. You're the ones who chose money over family when you decided to steal from your own daughter." With those words, I walked out of my childhood home, uncertain whether I would ever be welcomed back, but more certain than ever that I was finally standing up for myself, whatever the cost. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents were some of the most emotionally turbulent of my life. I moved my essential belongings to Aunt Jennifer's spare bedroom and began the painful process of building a legal case against my own family. Despite my parents' initial refusal to consider restitution, Marcus believed we had an exceptionally strong case and filed the lawsuit as planned. My first appearance in court was surreal. Sitting across from my parents in a formal legal setting, watching them forced to answer for their actions before a judge, rather than dismissing my concerns as they had throughout my childhood, I felt a confusing mixture of vindication and profound sadness. They had hired an expensive attorney who attempted to frame their actions as well-intentioned parental decisions, rather than financial misconduct. These were family financial choices made by parents with the authority to manage their minor child's resources, their lawyer argued. The plaintiff benefited from a stable home environment and numerous opportunities that these financial decisions supported. My lawyer countered with the explicit language of the trust documents. "Your Honor, this was not general family money. The grandparents established a specific educational trust with clear instructions that these funds were exclusively for Emily's college education. The defendants had a fiduciary duty to preserve these assets for their designated purpose, not to redirect them according to their preferences." The judge's questions to my parents were pointed and increasingly skeptical as our evidence was presented. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, are you disputing that you withdrew funds from an account explicitly designated for your daughter's education and used them for expenses related to your younger daughter's artistic pursuits?" My father attempted to justify their actions. "We viewed it as an investment in the family's overall future. Natalie's artistic talent represented the greatest potential return on investment." "That wasn't your decision to make with these particular funds," the judge responded firmly. "The trust had specific terms you were legally bound to honor." When we presented evidence of the credit accounts opened in my name, without my knowledge, my parents' position weakened further. Their attorney attempted to suggest that these accounts were opened with my implicit consent as a family member, but the judge was having none of it. "Are you suggesting," she asked their lawyer, "that parents have the right to use their adult children's identities to open financial accounts without their knowledge or explicit consent?" As the legal proceedings progressed through discovery, we uncovered even more damaging evidence. Bank records revealed that my parents had withdrawn over $120,000 from my educational trust over the years, far more than I had initially estimated. The money had funded not only Natalie's artistic development, but also family vacations, home renovations, and other expenses, entirely unrelated to either of their daughters' education. Each new revelation cut deep. The magnitude of their betrayal seemed to grow with every document we examined, every deposition taken. I began seeing a therapist to deal with the emotional fallout, trying to understand how the people who were supposed to love and protect me could have exploited me so systematically. Your parents appear to have developed an unhealthy fixation on your sister's potential success, my therapist explained during one session. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but understanding it might help you process your feelings. They likely convinced themselves they were acting for the greater good, even as they violated your trust and your rights. Meanwhile, I was struggling to stay focused on my education. I had enrolled in community college classes, while the lawsuit proceeded using my own saved money and emergency loans to cover tuition. The prestigious engineering program I'd been accepted to had granted me a 1-year deferment understanding my family emergency, but I would need to secure funding if I hoped to attend the following year. Throughout this period, Natalie remained caught in the middle. My parents initially tried to turn her against me, painting me as selfish and vindictive, willing to destroy family harmony for money. To her credit, my sister saw through their manipulation. She reached out to me secretly, at first meeting me for coffee away from our parents' watchful eyes. "I never knew they were using your college money for my stuff," she told me during one of these clandestine meetings, her eyes filling with tears. "I feel terrible, Emily. All those expensive supplies, the private lessons, I would have never accepted them if I'd known where the money was coming from." "I know, Nat," I assured her. "This isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." "I've looked at other options," she continued. "There are scholarship programs for art students, work-study opportunities. I don't need Westridge and its ridiculous tuition. I can develop my talent without stealing from your future." Her maturity and integrity in facing the situation only highlighted how our parents had underestimated and undervalued both of us, Natalie, by assuming she would prioritize her art over ethical concerns, and me by believing I would continue to accept unfair treatment indefinitely. As the case progressed, my parents made several attempts at settlement, each offering less than the full amount they had misappropriated. Marcus advised me to hold firm. "The evidence is overwhelmingly in your favor," he explained. "If this goes to final judgment, the court will likely award you the full restitution plus damages for the identity theft." 3 months into the legal proceedings, we arrived at what would prove to be our final court appearance. My parents looked tired and diminished, the strain of the case evident in their faces. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt at their obvious distress before reminding myself of the years of systematic exploitation that had led us to this point. The judge had reviewed all evidence and heard arguments from both sides. Today, she would issue her ruling. "Before I render my decision," she began, "I want to address a particularly troubling aspect of this case that emerged during discovery." She looked directly at my parents. Financial records indicate that the defendants were not only planning to pressure their daughter to take loans for her sister's education as she testified, but had actually begun the application process for additional fraudulent loans in her name without her knowledge. My heart raced as this new information sank in. They hadn't just suggested I take loans for Natalie. They had started the process without telling me, preparing to saddle me with even more debt I hadn't agreed to. The judge continued, her voice stern. Further investigation revealed the existence of a second trust fund, established by the paternal grandparents, which the defendants were also planning to access, despite similar restrictions on its use. I glanced at my father, whose face had gone ashen. This was new information even to me, another trust from my dad's parents that they had been planning to misappropriate. In light of all evidence presented, the judge concluded, "I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to provide full restitution of the original trust amount, plus reasonable growth totaling $157,000. Additionally, they are ordered to pay $20,000 in damages for the identity theft and credit fraud. The court will also refer the identity theft issue to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution, though that decision will be at the discretion of that office." The courtroom seemed to spin around me. We had won completely. The judgment exceeded even what we had hoped for, and the mention of potential criminal charges underscored the seriousness of what my parents had done. My father stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we can't possibly pay that amount immediately. It would bankrupt us." "The court will establish a payment plan," the judge replied unsympathetically. "Perhaps you should have considered the financial implications before misappropriating funds that were not yours to spend." As the judge outlined the terms of the payment schedule, I watched my parents huddle with their attorney, their expressions a mixture of defeat and disbelief. They had never expected to be held fully accountable for their actions. Like so many times throughout my childhood, they had assumed they could minimize or justify their favoritism toward Natalie, expecting me to accept whatever scraps of consideration they deigned to offer. After the ruling at the courthouse hallway, my mother approached me while my father spoke with their lawyer. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked, her voice bitter. "You've destroyed our family over money." I really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing her not as my mother, but simply as a woman who had made terrible choices. "No, Mom, I'm not satisfied. I'm heartbroken that it came to this. But the family was already damaged by years of unequal treatment and theft. I just finally stood up against it." "Your father's accounting practice will suffer when this gets out," she continued as though I hadn't spoken. "People won't trust him with their finances after this judgment." "That's the consequence of his actions, not mine," I replied quietly. "You both had years of opportunities to treat me fairly to honor the trust funds, as intended to support both your daughters equally. You chose differently. Now you're facing the results of those choices." She turned away, without another word, rejoining my father and their attorney. As I watched them leave, I felt no triumph, no vindictive pleasure in their humiliation. Instead, I felt a strange sense of closure, a chapter of my life ending painfully, but necessarily making way for something new to begin. Natalie, who had attended the hearing against our parents' wishes, approached me with tears streaming down her face. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I hugged her, grateful that at least this relationship remained intact. Now we both build our futures on honest foundations. No more secrets, no more unfair advantages, just two sisters supporting each other as equals. As we walked out of the courthouse together, the weight of years of unequal treatment began to lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would not be easy: relationships to rebuild, education to fund, emotional wounds to heal. But for perhaps the first time in my life, I was walking it on my own terms. The transition from being a daughter fighting for justice to a fully independent young woman was neither quick nor easy. In the immediate aftermath of the court ruling, I faced practical challenges that tested my newfound independence. The financial settlement wouldn't be paid all at once. The court had established a payment schedule spanning 2 years. Meanwhile, I needed to make immediate decisions about my education and living situation. Aunt Jennifer continued to provide me with a place to stay, her spare bedroom, becoming my sanctuary as I navigated this new chapter of my life. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted when I expressed concern about imposing. "Finding your footing after something like this takes time." With Jennifer's support and my lawyer's guidance, I worked with the university to reinstate my acceptance for the upcoming semester. The financial aid office was surprisingly understanding when I explained my situation, helping me secure emergency grants and loans to bridge the gap until the first installment of my settlement arrived. Moving to campus that fall was bittersweet. While most freshmen had parents helping them carry boxes and set up dorm rooms, I arrived with Aunt Jennifer and a few belongings packed into her sedan. The absence of my parents, no matter how justified, left an ache that not even vindication could entirely erase. My assigned roommate, Zoe, was a mechanical engineering major from Portland, with a quick laugh and no patience for pretense. On our first night after I'd shared a simplified version of my family situation, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "They're lost then. Sounds like they didn't deserve you anyway." Her matter-of-fact acceptance was exactly what I needed. We quickly developed a friendship that became my emotional anchor during that challenging first semester. When coursework became overwhelming or memories of family betrayal surfaced unexpectedly, Zoe was there with practical solutions or simple companionship depending on what the moment required. "Engineering is hard enough without family drama," she'd say. "Let's solve differential equations now and unpack your emotional baggage later. Both are important, but only one has a deadline tonight." Her pragmatic approach helped me compartmentalize my pain in healthy ways, allowing me to excel academically despite the ongoing emotional turmoil. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace and purpose in the structured challenges of engineering courses. Professors noted my dedication, and by mid-semester, I had been invited to join a research project studying sustainable water filtration systems, an opportunity usually reserved for upperclassmen. Meanwhile, the relationship with my parents remained fractured. The court-ordered payments arrived punctually, but without any personal notes or attempts at reconciliation. Through Natalie, I learned that my father's accounting practice had indeed suffered when news of the lawsuit circulated in our community. Some clients concerned about his financial ethics had taken their business elsewhere. My mother had increased her real estate work to compensate for the lost income, her resentment toward me apparently growing with each additional open house she conducted. Natalie's situation was equally complicated. She had declined the offer from Westridge, instead enrolling in public high school while taking supplemental art classes at a community arts center. This decision had further strained her relationship with our parents, who viewed it as a direct result of my lawsuit rather than Natalie's own ethical choice. "They still don't get it," she told me during one of our regular video calls. "They keep saying I'm throwing away my future because of your overreaction. They can't see that I don't want success built on stealing from my sister." Natalie began spending weekends with me at university whenever possible, developing friendships with Zoe and my other dorm mates. Away from our parents' influence, she flourished in unexpected ways, discovering interests beyond art and developing a confidence that had been overshadowed by our parents' narrow expectations. The holidays that first year presented a particular challenge. Aunt Jennifer hosted a small Thanksgiving dinner for us at her apartment, inviting Natalie and a few other relatives who had maintained relationships with me, despite my parents' attempts to turn family members against me. "Your grandparents would be proud of you," my great-aunt Eleanor told me as we helped clean up after dinner. "They never intended for their gift to become a source of such pain, but they would have admired your courage in standing up for yourself." Christmas was harder. Natalie split her time spending Christmas Eve with our parents and Christmas Day with me. She arrived at Jennifer's apartment with red-rimmed eyes, admitting that our parents had spent much of the previous evening criticizing my greed and disloyalty. "I told them they were wrong about you," she said, her voice small but determined. "I said if they kept talking that way, I'd leave. That's when Mom started crying and Dad got quiet." I hugged her tightly, proud of her strength, and pained that she had to defend me. "You shouldn't have to choose sides, Nat." "I'm not choosing sides," she replied with unexpected wisdom. "I'm choosing truth. There's a difference." As my first year of college progressed, I began to build a new support network beyond Zoe and my extended family. I joined a campus organization for first-generation and independent students, those navigating college without traditional family support. Through their weekly meetings, I met others who understood the unique challenges of self-reliance at a young age. One evening, after sharing pieces of my story with the group, another student approached me. "My parents took out credit cards in my name too," she said quietly. "I didn't know what to do about it, so I just paid them off to protect my credit score. I never thought about fighting back like you did." This conversation sparked an idea. With support from the student organization and a sympathetic finance professor, I organized a workshop on financial literacy and protection against family financial abuse. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of students attended, many sharing similar experiences of parents or relatives exploiting their credit or resources. "There's a whole silent epidemic of this kind of abuse," the finance professor noted after the successful workshop. "Would you consider developing this into an ongoing program? Students need this information, and you have both the knowledge and the personal experience to make it relatable." Thus began what would become one of the most healing projects of my college career, a student-led support group and education initiative focused on financial independence and protection. Through helping others recognize and address financial exploitation, I began to process my own trauma in constructive ways. The first installment of my settlement arrived near the end of that first academic year, providing enough funds to secure housing and tuition for the following year without loans. This financial breathing room allowed me to reduce my work hours and accept a summer research position that paid modestly, but offered valuable experience in environmental engineering. Throughout this period, I continued therapy gradually, working through the complex emotions surrounding my parents' betrayal. What you're experiencing is a form of grief, my therapist explained. You're mourning the parents you thought you had the family relationship you deserved, but never received. That grief is valid, even as you build a new life for yourself. By the start of my sophomore year, I had achieved a tentative stability. My academic performance had earned me additional scholarships. I had a solid friend group, and my work with the Financial Literacy Initiative was gaining recognition across campus. Natalie, now in her senior year of high school, was planning to attend a state university with a strong arts program, having secured several scholarships of her own. My parents had made minimal attempts at reconciliation, a birthday card with a generic message, an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner that came with implicit strings attached. Each time I responded politely but firmly, maintaining boundaries that protected my hard-won emotional health. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, I wrote in response to their Thanksgiving invitation, but that would require acknowledgement of the past and a commitment to equal respect moving forward. I won't pretend everything is fine simply for the appearance of family harmony. They didn't reply to that message, but through Natalie, I learned my mother had cried upon reading it, while my father had seemed thoughtful, rather than immediately dismissive, a small sign of potential growth perhaps. As my undergraduate career progressed, the legal and financial aspects of my case were largely resolved. The final settlement payment arrived at the beginning of my junior year, allowing me to complete my degree without debt and even begin a modest investment portfolio with guidance from my finance professor. More importantly, I had begun to recognize my own worth independent of my parents' valuation. The young woman who had once accepted being second best, who had worked multiple jobs while watching her sister receive every advantage, had been replaced by someone who understood her rights and value, someone who could advocate for herself and others with confidence and clarity. During my senior year, I received an unexpected email from my father. Unlike previous communications, this one contained no justifications, no subtle blame. Instead, it offered something I had never truly received from either parent: an apology. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he wrote. While I can't undo the past, I want you to know that I recognize the harm my actions caused you. Your mother and I failed you in fundamental ways, allowing our fixation on Natalie's potential to blind us to our ethical and legal obligations to you. More importantly, we failed to see and value you for the remarkable person you are. I understand if forgiveness isn't possible, but I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry. The email didn't magically heal years of damage, but it opened a door that had long been closed. Over the following months, we began a careful, limited correspondence. My mother eventually joined these exchanges, though her acknowledgement of wrongdoing came more reluctantly and incompletely than my father's. By the time I graduated with honors in environmental engineering, we had reached a point where my parents attended the ceremony, sitting quietly beside Aunt Jennifer, Natalie, and Zoe. They didn't try to claim credit for my success or insert themselves prominently into my celebration. Instead, they simply witnessed the achievement of the daughter whose potential they had once dismissed so casually. After the ceremony, my father shook my hand awkwardly before surprising me with a brief tentative hug. "We're proud of you, Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know that doesn't make up for anything, but it's true." My mother nodded beside him, adding softly, "You've accomplished all this despite us, not because of us. That says everything about your character." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation, no tearful embrace, or instant healing of deep wounds. But it was honest, and in its honesty lay the possibility of something new, a relationship based on reality, rather than manipulation, on respect, rather than exploitation. As I moved forward into graduate school, and eventually my professional career as an environmental engineer, my relationship with my parents continued to evolve slowly. We never returned to a conventional parent-child dynamic, too much had happened for that. But we found a way to be family on new terms, with clear boundaries and expectations of mutual respect. Natalie thrived in her own right, developing her artistic talents, while also discovering an interest in art therapy, using creative expression to help others process trauma. I guess watching you heal influenced me more than I realized, she told me once. You showed me that facing painful truths can lead to something stronger and more authentic. Looking back on that pivotal moment when I discovered my parents' betrayal and chose to fight back, I recognize it as the foundation upon which I built my adult life. The lawsuit wasn't just about recovering stolen funds, it was about reclaiming my sense of worth, about refusing to accept exploitation dressed up as family obligation. The journey wasn't easy. There were nights I questioned my decision days. I longed for the simplicity of just accepting my parents' narrative. But I've never regretted standing up for myself. In doing so, I discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed and forged a path based on truth rather than convenient fictions. Family should support dreams, not exploit them. Love should uplift, not manipulate. These lessons came at a high cost, but they shaped me into someone who recognizes her own value and advocates for herself without apology. That knowledge is worth more than any trust fund could ever provide. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that put you at odds with family, but was necessary for your own well-being? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more personal journeys of standing up for yourself, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, protecting your future sometimes requires the courage to face painful truths.